Cultural Center. The program we're going to talk about today, Interwoven, was an oral history initiative begun in 2016 by the Nordic Museum as a way to collaboratively work with Native American tribes, individuals, families that have a mixed heritage story to tell, both Nordic American and Native American, blending of cultures, of lives, memories, experiences, and shared values. And looking around here today, I'm encouraged by the use of the wood. This is something in the landscape that has been one shared common value, and something that we've seen in our interviews come up in discussion. As part of the format today, I want to also thank the 4 panelists that are up here who are sharing their experiences and insights, also talking a bit about some of the interviews that we did in the past 3 years. Gwen curator from the Washington State Historical Society, Mr. Hanks from the Norgaard Center in Stanwood, retired professor and author, Odin Lonning, notable artist, and Aaron Jones, member of the Tulalip Tribes. I'd also like to give some thanks to a couple organizations that were very instrumental in helping us with the interviews, gathering them, archiving them, working with local partners, notably the Tulalip Tribes. Thank you so much for your support and your help. For Culture of King County, which through its Heritage Grants program provided funding support, and also Humanities Washington through their Stories Grant program. They've been great supporters. The format is a little free-flowing today. Really, there's not a lot of structure, but there are certain keywords that are primers, and this is to just help with the conversation. They can also be touchstones that we've seen come up in the interviews in different ways that have just been really great to listen to and to preserve for future generations. So with that, we'll start with Gwen.
One of the things that really struck me about this program was the incredible number of tribes represented and also of people of Scandinavian descent. It can often be hard to identify oneself as part of a community, especially as part of multiple communities. But one of the things that's reflected across many of these histories is that many of these relationships came about because individuals were fortunate enough to be in regions where there was a lot of cross-cultural communication. This particularly is the case in Alaska, where you see Scandinavians, Native people, Russians, folks from all over the place coming together and communicating. And so, for me, I found that very encouraging to see that these cultures were interconnected. One of the interview participants specifically talked about how they felt that immigrant communities and Native communities had a special connection because they both were closer to their traditional values, and they brought those traditions forward and kind of joined together to celebrate them. And for me, that was a very powerful statement.
I was struck by the randomness when we talk about particularly diversity. Diversity is something that we're kind of thrust into, whether you want to be there or not. In other words, we all come from a myriad of different backgrounds, etc., which then kind of leads to the idea down the line. In other words, when I read the interviews and I look at them, other words started popping into my head that kind of cast themselves as a way of defining what we're talking about. One of them being culture, one of them being geography, and the other one being choice. Because the randomness of if you had a grandparent who, say, encouraged, say, the Nordic side of your interest, and you were growing up, you're going to look and adopt those kinds of things. What seemed to be, and I can be corrected, but seemed to be that most of the individuals that were interviewed leaned toward their Native American side, the peoples of the First Nations, because that's geography. I mean, they're in that backyard. They're there. That culture surrounds them. And so I think that was natural for them to do. And then at the end, you see things changing over their time. As a small child, for me, culture's like dropping a rock into a pond. There are concentric circles that come out. You have your immediate culture, right? So it's your parents and your peers and things like that. And you start learning from them. And then later on, it's a wider community, and then it's a society. And so at some point, as you achieve maturity, I think at some point they make a choice. Some gravitated heavily, like, I want to learn more about my Nordic side. I want to find out about that. And for that, you need to do a lot of different work. In many cases, they went to Denmark, or they went to Sweden, or they went to Norway. And that's the geography side of it. So to me, that diversity becomes much more rare. At some point, all of it, I grew up thinking I was just English. We had large, family gatherings, and I found out through the DNA test, I ended up being mostly Irish. And all those people that were showing up were my Irish relatives. And the Irish have a lot of kids. And so, as an adult now that I'm understanding more about that, I gravitate for wanting to understand more about that Irish side. I think each one of the participants kind of went through that way of looking which part of my diversity do I come along with.
Well, I'm reminded again how lucky I am based on where I come from, Juneau, Alaska, and I realized, I was just now reminded again, I guess, that both of my parents, my dad was from Oslo and my mother Tlingit, had an interesting way of, I don't know what you would call it, guiding me with a very relaxed attitude. No strong effort to push it one way or the other. My dad was very subtle about his pride. He took me to a couple of movies that were, one of them was The Viking with, I can't remember the actor's name, Kirk Douglas.
I love that.
Heroes of Telemark was another one. He took me. We never went to movies, but those were a couple of movies that he took me to as a kid. And as far as my mother was concerned, she took me to a traditional performance of a Tlingit dance group. And I don't remember her saying anything. She was interested in seeing this particular group that came from Haines area. And Klukwan, the traditional village. And that made such an impression on me that I had to learn more. And all these years later, here I am, still learning and getting ready to teach, but I guess I should really express gratitude in the way that my parents kind of nudged me very subtly and just let me go. And my influences have been many along my path. And living in Seattle, of course, that's been an influence, and bumping into and speaking more with other tribal artists and other artists of lots of different ethnicities is constant fuel for that kind of an energy, I guess you'd call it, an attitude. To the point where now, one of the things when I start teaching the Alaska Native community of Seattle area, I'm going to make a point of something which is traditional in the Tlingit culture, which is to honor both sides of your family, whether it's in an introduction or discussion or anything. You pay respect to both sides, and when I start teaching, I'm going to remind students, whether they be children or adults, to figure out ways to do that. Just one more thing to be proud of.
Visha Tigrit Würfel, Stefan Skater Titsta, Seoptin Titsta, Aaron Jones Titsta, Hello family, I call you family because this is kind of like my newfound family. I didn't realize I didn't really pay attention to my Scandinavian ancestry until I was asked by Tessa in an email, like if I could speak to that a little bit here today with the Nordic Museum. So that's why I call you family, and just found you. So I'm a Tulalip tribal member. My mother is Lena Jones, my father is Daniel Jones, and my grandparents are Kenny Moses Sr., Teresa Joseph, and my paternal grandparents are Charles Jones and Nancy Jones. So if you haven't noticed, I'm mixed, and in that regard, that's where my diversity story begins. For the longest time, I always thought I was just Welsh and native, but I'm happy to say I'm also Scandinavian, Norwegian, and also Danish on my paternal grandmother's side. And then in addition to diversity, my Indian name is Stefan. That means one who cares for animals, because as a kid, I was always, very interested in helping animals and taking care of them or taking them in. And, both sides of my family really encouraged that. And also, Sahilton is one of my First Nations Indian names. It means one who remembers. Because I guess as being the youngest child, it's another aspect of diversity. There's many layers of diversity, but as the youngest child, I always remembered things my older siblings said or my parents said to older siblings. And in that regard, I learned a lot. And so, I guess starting from there, I learned more about my Welsh side as my oldest sister traveled to Wales to learn about them and meet cousins out there. But now I'm more interested in going to Norway and trying to find cousins out there as well. So there's always things I want to say, and then I start forgetting just as I get up here. But I'm honored to be here today. Thank you for letting me be here, and that's the start of my diversity side. So.
Before we segue into the next touch question word, I wanted to offer insight just in terms of the oral histories that we collected in these past couple of years, and to really express my gratitude for those who shared the time out of their lives to share the stories, to have them documented. It's not always an easy conversation, diversity and identity, and with particular emphasis on the next word, knowledge. What we did find out is that there were several candidates who we did approach who did not feel comfortable talking about their oral history because of the knowledge factor. They just felt like they didn't know enough about one side or the other. And I think that's fine. There's no judgments there, but it was an interesting thing to find out that people's comfort level in terms of their knowledge was a factor in determination of how we could move forward or collect the oral histories from different people. So with that, I'm going to start this time with Richard.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Again, I keep going back to my original premise that I think there was, I can't remember which oral history it was, but said that they had asked their Nordic grandfather, more about who they were, and he was said, I'm American. I'm just going to be American. That's what it is. So, and for Native Americans, as we well know, so much has been lost because of the oppression of the federal government and the fact that they were invaded by other foreigners. That's always an interesting concept to me, is that others made a conscious choice to sever the relationships with their mother or father country and to come into somebody else's country and impose themselves on that. So in that case, so much knowledge has been lost. So in that respect, I guess I have a question, is Native American culture diminished by hybridism? Because I think it might have been Lindsay Ravensong or somebody else who said that they knew 3 dances that had remained. And they had taken those 3 dances, and then they had built upon that. And in essence, you're contemporizing what Native American culture is, because you've lost so much, and I've seen it in other places in California and others where I work, that takes place. And so you borrow from others. I know in the 80s, the Lakota used to come down to Southern California, and they would introduce new things. So my question always has been, when it comes to knowledge, does hybridism, making a hybrid of what had been the ancient lore or the ancient knowledge, does that in any way diminish Native American culture? Odin might have a better opinion about that myself.
Offhand, I would say it depends on the culture group. I'm fortunate enough to be part of a group, tribe, culture that started bringing itself back a long time ago, and that's really true up and down the northwest coast. All of the tribes, Wapak, Haida, Tlingit, Symposium, culture is still a living culture, and being diminished by hybridization, I haven't really experienced it yet, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. My artistic world is a small one, even though I'm trying to expand it. So my contact with, a wider area of artists is kind of limited, but I guess I would just have to say it's just as a feeling that I haven't experienced it yet. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
I might add, I didn't mean that as a negative. Just mean how it changes.
Right, yeah.
It's a generational change and it's a cultural change.
And adding to something else you said too, that trading has always been, well, not so much nowadays, but trading not just goods and services, but things like songs from other tribal groups. So that kind of lends itself to the positive side of it.
So when it comes to knowledge, like I've been very blessed to kind of be raised here and getting to know about the knowledge from my grandfather that he passed down. For example, this is my family crest. It's a cedar tree because one of his teachings was always that cedar is together when it just bends when you try to break it, but when it's just on its own, it snaps in half, so the more cedar you have. So as a family teaching or family knowledge, it's always try and stay together, so in hard times you don't break. But in terms of, I guess, sharing knowledge between kind of both cultures that I'm part of here, orally, I'll never really get to learn too well from my family about my Norwegian side, because my grandmother's father passed away pretty tragically when she was only 13, and he was like kind of the direct descent of his grandmother was Norwegian, so a lot of like our family memories, I guess, or his knowledge of what our Norwegian side was lost in that. And so it's kind of like it goes to that knowledge sharing now is what I have to resort to, because I can't really rely on any sort of family teaching on the Norwegian side. So it's going into that, I'll have to kind of rely on your family here to learn more of that.
Come to the Nordic.
Yeah, go to the Nordic. My dad's
What?
Well, I have a very personal relationship to this question, and I will admit that listening to several of these oral histories hit me particularly hard, because I'm a person of Swedish and White Mountain Apache heritage. And I recall, and I know not much about either, my grandmother talked about how the only Swedish words she learned growing up were curse words, because my great-grandfather was so insistent that they would be completely American that he never allowed it spoken at home. And my grandfather was of White Mountain Apache descent. He and his sisters were either, this is very muddy as to whether they were given or whether they were possibly taken to a place, a school, where they basically lost their heritage. And then after that point, he did not identify in that way any longer. And so the knowledge that I have of my family is in scraps. It's in bits and pieces. It's in the things that my elders will talk about, and it's in the things that they will not talk about. And so one of the things, it was a comment on identity with oral histories, but I felt it really spoke to me also of knowledge, was that identity really depends on who chooses to identify themselves and how they choose to identify themselves. And I think that knowledge is an important part of that. And by doing programs like this, it does help those of us who struggle with this question of identity because we don't know, because we can at least embrace the ability of others to express that and kind of help guide ourselves through that process.
Richard, something you mentioned about hybridization being a factor. It struck me also that even in families that are traditionally Scandinavian, or especially in the past century, we've seen in some cases less and less of that being generationally passed down. Language is a big example, where in Ballard they used to teach Norwegian in the schools, the public schools. Obviously, that's not done today, but I'm wondering if maybe there are other factors that play into this Americanization that are broader and not just limited to Native American families.
Well, I think you mentioned language. I think language is a big phenomenon of knowledge, but also identification. Leanne Hinton at UCLA has written a lot about this. Her premise is that language, I know in Southern California, up here, the recreation of language, learning it again, teaching the children, trying to get that, is very, very important. Almost every tribe has centered on that as part of the resurrection or the renewal process. And it's interesting, she pointed out, it's a mindset. In Northern California, instead of saying like, I have a sister, it says I'm sistered. I don't take my baby to the shade. I go with my baby to the shade. It sounds very small, sounds very minute, but it's a way we think about it, whereas Western Euro-Americans have always had language such as I take, seize, hold, change, those kinds of things. And that creates a difference culturally, is what she's saying, and I think that that's absolutely true. So, and I was, as far as, it's always going to be a hybrid, because we're not the same people that our ancestors were in the 16th century, 15th century. So it's how we deal with that, right? How we recreate who we are today in the situation. I was taking a Korea elder home one time, and he said, because the big thing that it permeates around is like blood quantum, right? If we're all going to do the DNA and we decided who we are by blood quantum, that gets to be a really slippery slope. And he said, Richard, being native these days is a state of mind. I thought that was very insightful by him. He's teaching the Saranda language to people. He's recreating that. So I thought that was very cool.
That's a good lead into our next type of identity. Gwen.
I really personalized a lot of this just as I was listening to it, as I imagine many of you will when you listen to these histories. And it was interesting to me the contrast between participants who had a very strong sense of the relationship within a specific community. As someone pointed out earlier, folks tended to identify with either their Nordic side or their native side, and more typically the native side because they were here. But I also found a lot of personal connection with people who talked about not really necessarily fitting in as well and not knowing which side to pick. Because I think that is something that we're struggling with more and more as a society, is that while I think it's very positive that people are encouraged to embrace heritage, it can also be very difficult for those of us who have multiple identities within ourselves, and not knowing how to choose. but why should we have to choose when we can embrace both? And for me, that was very powerful, listening to how different individuals were finding ways to do that. There was one discussion in one of the oral histories where they talked about how their mother, who was Native, brought Scandinavian traditions into the family as well, as a way of, being closer to their father. And I think that there was quite a bit of that happening in these histories, and I think that we can all learn from that moving forward.
Again, I go back, I think identity is a personal journey more than beliefs. And what we're doing is we're getting tons more information through DNA testing, those kinds of things. So somebody, I think it might have been Lindsay Ravensong again, and I keep going back to her, or Jessica, that talked about whiteness, this idea of whiteness and how it has defined our society. And that is breaking down more and more, particularly through the testing that we see that we're not exactly who we think we were, are we? So these kind of societal overlays that people placed upon us are becoming more and more arbitrary and more meaningless. And therefore, identity, more than being, I think we need to separate it out from what society says we are. And some of the speakers had trouble with that. I didn't quite fit in. And I think one of them said, stop trying to be native, because you don't look native. And that's where I'm going to. I mean, how do we change these interpretations? How do we change these identifications about that? And so at the end of the day, when it goes back to choice, it's your own personal journey as you go back and you study your ancestors and who they were, the legends or the stories that you heard growing up. And then at some stage, I think you find the comfort, whether that's in kind of a hybrid mix of who you are, or you say, well, I kind of lean. I love the idea, and there are artists like Odin and others who are doing this, where they're incorporating runes and Nordic symbols into contemporary Native American symbols. And that, to me, I think is just incredibly healthy. We're moving toward a different kind of stage where we can embrace that kind of diversity, and that helps define our identity.
And in the spirit of sharing, which is me being on the path of becoming more of a teacher, identity is probably the strongest thing in the culture. Again, most of the coastal, well, it could be a lot of tribes, but my focus, of course, is Northwest Coast, and specifically Tlingit. So identity is number one on the list of where does the art come from. It relates to clans, crests, villages, tribes, certain areas that you lived in, and it's all about identity. When I wear dance regalia and perform with a traditional Tlingit dance group, anyone looking at my regalia with a certain basic amount of knowledge would be able to tell probably who my mother was, what village she was from, and what clan I belonged to, so that I wouldn't have to open my mouth at all. Everything that I am wearing or would be wearing would identify me and my clan and ancestors and everything. Another little point about a lot of Native art is that nothing is really compartmentalized. Everything is all tied together. Language, song, stories, dance, the artwork. So when I first started sharing with young grade school students, and a lot of time both Native and non-Native, but I would always ask Native kids, what is it about being Tlingit that you're proud of? And a lot of times the answers were the same. Oh, it's the fancy artwork and fancy costumes, or regalia, is the proper word. Eventually I learned to modify that. At first I thought to say, no, that's not it, but then somebody said, don't use negative terms when you're trying to, speak with kids. Say, yes, but it's also where the art comes from, a connection to nature. And now that's again, at the top, along with identity, that's where my hopeful inspiration will be fueled in getting natives, whether they're adults or children, to think in terms of, you know, where the culture came from in the first place. Because I think we all need to get back to some kind of respect for our Mother Nature. That's a whole other topic.
So with identity, I want to touch base with kind of language and culture, but also like having to choose sides. So the way I introduced myself, you know, I started with who I am, and within, I guess, the way I was raised, the Symposium teaching that my family has. You really start with yourself first before you broaden out to whatever else it is. So I started off with identity by introducing myself as Mr. Helmskata, Hamilton. And then from there, when I introduced my grandparents, that kind of shows the diversity of who I am. My grandmother was First Nation, so from there, people locally will know, like, oh, he's also Canadian too. But, and then when I say my paternal grandparents' side, then they know, you know, I'm also white. So this kind of goes into like, you know, what side are you? Because there's, sometimes with some people, you know, everyone has their own opinions of what identity is, and that's why our society becomes so binary. You gotta choose one side or the other, and it's really hard just to have people kind of accept you as who you are. Because I can't change, you know, the complexion of my skin. I can't go darker or lighter. I can't, you know, around my, I guess my father's side of the family, I can't really speak my language without confusing them or scaring them possibly. And it's just kind of interesting to have to like code switch in that sense and really kind of decide when I'm going to be what, when it's just like I just got to be calm and just be who I am all the time. And in terms of language growing up as part of my identity, learning a little bit of the Shusi, I really should have stuck with it, but I was always like wanting to move too much and play sports too often. Like we always learned about why animals have names they have, like when you learn the name of the animal, there's always these stories that are associated with their language, and just adjectives in their language. It's just, and songs that are also stories. And so it's just kind of like, I don't know, nice to hear my fellow panelists just about what they think of that. I don't know if there's a way to extend.
That's great. I do want to acknowledge and thank one of the interviewees for the project in some ways. Some of you may have noticed that the symbol that we associated with the Interwoven project actually comes from a design artwork that Emma made. It combines both images of a traditional dollar horse with beadwork from the Confederate tribes. And really want to thank her for sharing that with us in support of the project. Also, I think it's important for me to say too that the mission of the Nordic Museum is grounded in social justice values. These encompass diversity, respect, tolerance, respect for nature. And so I've found this to be a really rewarding program in making that kind of come to life. And along that same line of thought, the interviews that we did collect, we're sharing with the public, with our partners, with anyone on an unrestricted basis. We want to make these available for people to listen to learn from, to use, whether it's scholarly use or just to share with a friend. So at this point in the program, I'm going to invite the audience to ask questions or have a dialogue with the panelists, if there are any.
I have a question. Are there any caveats regarding misappropriation of cross-cultural art, literature, even political ideas?
Caveats, meaning, what would another word be? be restrictions?
No, not restriction, but suggestions that we're not to be insensitive, adopting maybe artwork or stories, ideas. And even in politics these days, it seems like there are, movements of people adopting cultural norms or ideas for a gain. Excuse me, voice, I got a little bit of a touting.
You want to see if you can start off there?
So I'm trying. I guess like the biggest thing with me, the way I was raised, is when you're gonna learn an art, like for me, if I was gonna learn Coast Salish art, I have to like basically have the master artist accept me and then begin teaching me, and I can't really deviate from what they're teaching me there because they're passing on their knowledge directly to me. And so I know it's really tempting with the internet these days to be able to Google search things and begin to take shapes or art and just kind of apply them. But even if I were to learn more of my Coast Salish ways with, a master artist, and then try and learn more of like my Welsh or my Norwegian art styles, like I'd have to go travel and find an artist who would be willing to more or less teach me that. I don't know if that would be something similar.
Well, it just reminded me of something I'd forgotten about. When I first traded artwork for my website years ago, almost 20 years ago, I got an email with very threatening sound, obviously from a white supremacist, Aryan nation, but the comment was, "How dare you do that savage artwork with a proud name like Odin?" And I thought, wow, I'm getting ready to get myself a Facebook page and talk about a lot of things, teaching, collaborating, working with other, combining Norwegian art with my traditional Tlingit, showing examples. And my wife's a little nervous. She thinks I'm going to get severely attacked for doing that. We'll see what happens, but that's a whole side topic all to itself again. In the culture, in the Tlingit, I often find myself thinking off in different directions based on hearing one word. While you were asking the question, something made me think about the word, now I forgot the word. But the concept is, appropriation. Non-native people doing native art. I get that question a lot. How do you feel about non-natives? Because there are quite a few in the Seattle area. Some of them commanding the highest prices. And they're very good, very knowledgeable. And I finally learned to answer the question this way. If they have respect for the culture and the art, they do it properly and they know what's behind it, and maybe they share with native people, then it's fine. They're worthy of respect. If they're using it just to make a fast buck, no respect, no. So there's a couple of different topics there.
We have one question in the back first, and then this maybe in the front. Is there a question back here?
Hi.
Yes.
Something that I've become aware of just fairly recently, and which I'm kind of happy about, this is from the Scandinavian Cultural Center at PLU, Pacific Lutheran, which would be a good place there to also pursue your learning about that side of the field. But I may pronounce this incorrectly, the Sami, that's correct. And I just wondered if any of you know enough about that you could comment on maybe similarities between their experience and the Native American First Nations experience.
Let me try with that just a beginning point. And this goes back to the mission of the Nordic Museum.
Exactly.
And in terms of being encompassing, in terms of identity. Our new museum makes a point of reflecting the Sami people and indigenous people from Europe as as part of the Nordic family. It's part of the pan-Nordic identity. We have, to make this something for visitors to learn about, we have a display that includes Sami culture, artifacts, history, and that was something our old museum didn't do. So this has been an area where we've had growth, and at the same time, we've been able to expand our programming in terms of Sami culture. So it's not just looking at things, but also actively engaging local Sami, Pacific Sami survey as a people, and welcoming them and encouraging them to be part of the Nordic family. It's a little loud tonight. We have a gift from the Hibulb Center today that's from a Sami craftsman. We're going to share it as a token of our thanks. So that's coming up.
I was struck, and again, I had this thought as I was reading the interviews and everything, of the easy kind of melding that takes place, particularly of Ainu people at that region of the world, the top of the world, with Russian culture, Russian Orthodox religion, and obviously anything Nordic at that time. And I had no idea at that time that they had brought Sami people over to help instruct on raising reindeer. A couple of the families were involved in learning that craft, and it just struck me that how transferable and translatable, all the cultures around the region seem to be with each other.
On the note about oral history, we had the good fortune this past year to interview a relative of Samuel Malto, the Sami man who was involved in that. One of the federal government-sponsored, reindeer importations to Seattle that then went up to Alaska. Balto was a key figure as a reindeer, Sami reindeer herder as part of that group. And so we have that oral history. Okay, you got a question?
My question goes back to the issue of cultural appropriation. When I say that there has always been there for many years. My background is Swedish. I lived in Sweden. I was the language son. My Swedish grandmother was many part of my life. I was assumed and learned a lot about that culture because of that. On the other hand, both my husband and I have an affinity toward the culture and the arts of the First Nations. And he is a skilled wood carver, northwest coast of Iowa. And I have taken a workshop from Joe Samuels and learned the Raven's Tail technique. Both of us have done a number of pieces, but it had made both of us, it still makes me uneasy. Those pieces in the world and not know what's going to happen to them after we leave this world. And we felt strongly about the issue of not wanting to participate in cultural appropriation. This was learning experience, spiritual experience for both of us, but what do we do with what's left to make sure that it's not misidentified?
I think that's where museums, cultural centers can play a helpful role in terms of documentation. Speaking from a perspective of someone who works with historical collections, we call that provenance, and the starting point is we document the provenance for what it is and not for what it's not. So in the case of your artwork, that would be something we would document as done by you in this style. That's a very practical and bare bones approach from a museum professional, but there are other considerations, like certainly like an art market, that's a totally different animal. So
what happens to people's estates? Lots of things go into yard sales, into estate sales.
They call me. One second.
And so part of what I want to know is, how would you approach this? Speaking to me, who has participated in the art of another culture than my own.
I know for my family, I think we'd see it as, you know, if you sat down with a person, you learned with them. Like, there's a difference between like finding it on the internet and mimicking that style versus actually sitting down with someone who's teaching you how to do it. And it's really important to, you know, not only give credit that, hey, this was my teacher in this is how I learned how to do this technique or this design, but it's also important to just kind of share, like, you know, you really learned from that individual. Because, like, I agree, there's a difference between the market and, like, preserving, like, kind of like a cultural crossings. And so it's just kind of important to share the story with that, you know, orally or in writing, and just letting your family know. Because hopefully it stays within the family, because you don't want things to go away to the other
I had one piece get out of my hands, let one piece get out of my hands, because I donated it to the next First Nation for an auction to try to buy back all of the pieces that have been part of their heritage that were taken to Ohio. It's in Ohio Cultural, or Ohio Historic Society's collection, but on loan. And I thought, okay, that would be something that would be cool to have in an auction. But it changed hands after it was purchased by the initial purchaser, and then it was put online, and I just felt terrible.
Anybody else have thoughts?
Well, I think I encourage, you need to make sure that they have a record of who you are and what you did that goes along with that it's talking about. That's extremely important. I know that when the piece was sold, that would be part of it. Because that's a unique story. When you use a Swedish background, emulating the art and the culture, you should bring respect to that. You know, learning from the appropriate people and giving them that respect. But notating that, so you know. So even if it's online, it's or something, you can contact people and say, wait a minute, we need to make sure that this is attached or knowledgeable.
To some extent it was, but again, on down the road, who knows?
Just to kind of give you a,
I quit trying to look at that because I don't want to.
Well, I have a question for you. I mean, would you feel better if you started doing, let's say, Swedish art?
Well, I do. I'm good.
Okay. But, I mean,
Yeah,
but you don't feel that you don't need to go learn from masters of that craft in Sweden?
I have. I learned it.
Oh, okay. I was saying about transferable efforts.
We have a question back here.
yes.
Well, it's more question and part challenge, but a little troublemaker that I remember when he was this big. But what I've noticed in all the study that I've done, and I don't know, Piano can answer to this, and a little troublemaker needs to go look at it, but I've noticed that First Nations and older classical art from Europe, a lot of it looks similar. Like the Viking canoes and tribal canoes that we have, and certain designs and certain different designs. I just wonder what you all think about that. A challenge for a little troublemaker there to go and find out more about it.
Well, since I've been called out by someone who tried to give me a little bit of art when I was younger stories, so I know for me, I haven't been afforded the opportunity to really learn too much about the European side of my family. I really wish I did. I hope so in the future. I feel like I actually have the patience now for my master's degree to really sit down and actually read more about that stuff, but something I really do need to learn, because I'm sure there's a lot of similarities, and hopefully I can be a family out there too.
Yeah.
Thank you for calling me out, keeping me in check.
I thought, hey, you said not there, I better go ahead and try it.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Don't you think, and if you could comment on this, culture is fluid. It's evolved, it's always evolving. You can't go, okay, this is the Swedish culture. This is how it always has been, and that's how it always will be. That doesn't happen. The same Native American, it evolves. And what do you feel about just the evolution of cultures and merging of cultures?
Well, it seems like, for me, and specifically Tlingit culture, it gets right back to identity and where it came from in the first place. The pride in that seems to be kind of, well, I guess maybe you're kind of asking, do modern influences change the culture just as a natural progression of, or is culture locked in and then not at all influenced by what happens in the modern world?
I don't think you can escape influence. And I guess is my point. It's always going to evolve and change over time.
Well, evolved. I guess that's the word I'm not, the knowledge of plants and medicine and respect for where you come from and it being connected to the natural world is a finite thing. So it can't really evolve, except maybe if an artist becomes political and uses his art to start making statements about how we're treating our mother planet, maybe that's an example of a little piece of the culture evolving. I think I'm kind of heading in that direction myself, learning how to speak up against certain things that need indigenous voices where they haven't existed before.
And I would add that there's evolution and evolution. If we talk about the larger cultures around the world, I think that they change constantly. We're not talking about. I think, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think with the Native American culture that there's more of an emphasis because of saving what is there because of how much was lost. I see it with all the people that I deal with. And therefore, there's more of kind of a looking back and trying to get the best aspects of what the ancestors gave, as opposed to, say, Euro-American culture, which is much more of casting aside and grabbing something new.
And it goes also, I think, to language evolves also. And, we're trying to revive. You should see, I'm not sure how many original native speakers there are. Grace Liddell was one of the last ones that she's been on in years. Trying to revive languages. When language evolves, it's a tricky business.
That's a problem with you.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just kind of going into that, I don't know if it's, like, I guess maybe there's some terminology that there's a little confusion around, but I think I'd call it more like the culture is adapting rather than evolving. Because when you look at, like, the sheep seed, the way we were taught long ago, it's kind of like any first language, it's like when you're babies, like you're speaking normally, but these days, because with English being the predominant, language, you learn that first quickly, and then now, like, technology, we're able to adapt the way that we teach language to youth and young ones, and so there's ways that native artists or any artists can really just take advantage of that to help influence learning traditional things, but it's more just kind of adapting to like what's there.
I had a question for.
I was just going to interrupt you just before
speaking about. I think that from my nation anyway, we've had to hold on so hard to culture, and there was so much effort to eradicate that culture, and the choices my ancestors made to hang on to what they could has impacted us today. I think it's really different than we have a lot of Scandinavian cultures, which are still in full power, you know, and especially in this, you know, southern coastal area, where it's really been trying to stamp out, you know, keep the language out of people, keep, you know, trying to take that away from our children. And so holding on to it, every grain of sand is, you know, a gift from the ancestors, and any piece that's lost or changed to adapt to modern society is gone. You know, and there's only so much left that, you know, you fight to hang on to, and you teach and nurture it down. I think they're really different comparisons in terms of what the culture is changing. But in language, you know, my daughter's learning language, and there's words she wants to text to people that she speaks language with, and they don't have a word for marshmallow, so the elders have to get together and talk about what's that word going to be, how's that going to happen, and everyone comes to a consensus. Okay, here's our word.
That's adaptation, isn't it?
There it is, right? But not for words that existed, you know, not for here. You know, that word's not going to change.
I think you can bring respect to what the ancestors have given.
Yeah.
As well as, you know, being aware of the
Yeah.
adaptation to contemporary times.
Yeah. Makes it relevant
I don't
for
see
her,
conflict
you know.
in that myself.
Yeah.
Because you have to live in this day and age.
Exactly. She wants to be able to talk about marshmallows, so.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, go ahead. Last question.
Yeah, sort of continuing this idea a little bit. There's always been connection and some fluidity between cultures. I think Odin referred to trade. It's always happened. There's always been contact, and there hasn't been isolation. From one side of the country to the other, you know, people's move to each other work. I'm wondering though, today, maybe the internet and social media makes it feel really frenetic. Does that make it harder to sort of pin down who you are and identity pull from? Or does it make it easier? Does it open the worlds up and make it easier to practice?
Should make it easier.
I would
Better access.
Yeah, I would say it makes it easier to at least start that search. I'm starting to make permission to contact people, but I'm kind of going through a little bit of this myself. But there are still, you know, large groups of people who aren't necessarily connected to the internet, but are really need to speak to. So, both.
And the burdens to know the difference between what you want to accept, what you don't want to accept. That's important.
It's definitely something I'll have to use to learn more about my Norwegian side is the internet, which, you know, to me personally, there's some problems with hearing that, but also it feels a little less genuine not being able to meet people right away and search in person, but it's something I'll have to resort to since I can't really fly to Norway tomorrow.
All right, well, I want to thank everyone for their commentary, especially our panelists for being here today. On the note about the internet, we do have all the oral histories available online. And before we adjourn, I do want to invite Tessa up here for a moment. The Nordic Museum would like to offer a token of our appreciation and thanks for your help with the project. Eric Peel is here to some insight into it.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you for having us today. This is fantastic, and this is a small token of our appreciation from Jokkmokk, or Jokkmokk in the Sami language, which is on the bend of the river, the Great Lule River, but also it has been a gathering place for 10,000 years where every February the Sami people all gather to trade. But it's a small token of our appreciation, so thank you so much.
Jonathan Saja, I wanted to also introduce, he's been the co-lead on the Interwoven project.
Also, I found it interesting to
have the people who were interviewed stand up. Great to see some of the faces that, if you go online to the Nordics website, you can view them. I think there's, you can also.
Just in closing too, I wanted to say that the Interwoven project is something we're going to be continuing as an institution with our oral history program efforts. This is not a finite